You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, your host, and I've got Paul Hawken on the show today. Paul's an environmentalist, entrepreneur, economist, author, activist. Paul's the editor, author of Regeneration-Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, which came out recently. He's also had a New York Times bestseller, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever to propose to reverse global warming. He's a co-founder of Project Drawdown. He has another book, The Ecology of Commerce, pointing towards a sustainable global economy, as well as a number of other books. We could go on and on. Another thing that Paul did was a TV show that was called Growing a Business, a 17-part PBS series on the challenges of starting a socially responsible company. And Paul's had a hand in opening Erewhon, which is a grocery store which is close to my house. I know one location. Back in 1967, Paul was part of that back, I believe, on the East Coast, and now it's gotten quite a bit bigger, particularly out here in LA. And one of the fascinating pieces of, Paul, your story is going back and working with Martin Luther King Jr. to prepare for the marches in Selma and Montgomery. So without further ado, Paul, welcome to the program.
Matt, thank you very much. I look forward to our conversation.
Well, tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you here. Obviously, a fascinating journey going back to the year of my birth, 58 years ago in 1965. You working with Martin Luther King Jr. What kind of got you on that path?
Well, I grew up in Berkeley, California, which was at that time only one of three communist cities in the United States. I joke about Cambridge, Madison, and Berkeley, but it was so leftist and radical, which I loved. And so to me, it's sort of like if you're, like a fish in water, you don't know what water is, and same with me growing up in Berkeley. I just thought everybody cared about social justice, and was against political corruption, and so it was pretty natural for me to go down there. I saw footage, of what was going on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The kids being beaten and truncheoned, and German shepherds and all that sort of stuff. So I'd already been involved with civil rights up here in California, and so I got in a car and went down there and played a very minor role in terms of registering the press, as a media coordinator, but it was simply an opportunity to be a fly on a wall of an extraordinary event, really, and extraordinary people.
Well, that is an amazing journey to start at that place as a young person, kind of at the feet of masters in terms of working and organizing and social justice and starting a movement. So how does that inform your work in the environmental movement?
Well, there's no difference. Environmental justice, social justice are the same thing, and the degradation, the loss of the biosphere, whether it's oceans or land or rivers or water, farmland, pollinators, etc., is all due to basically unjust economic practices, which are extractive, which basically are based on taking. And we've taken a lot, and the results show. So to me, moving into the environment was natural. Now, that being said, growing up, I grew up on a farm, and in part with my grandfather, and I was watching California basically be destroyed, the San Joaquin, Sacramento Valley. We'd drive by, a farmhouse had been there for, 3 generations or more, and then a year later, all the big oaks were gone, shading the house, and there'd be basically a strip mall, with a gas station and a fast food outlet. So I grew up watching California being destroyed. And so that was there with me all the time. And I grew up in the Sierra Club and, as a little kid, rock climbing and all that, scrambling around Yosemite. So it was very painful to watch California be destroyed by development.
So then, fast forward a bit through that. What took you to starting Erewhon and building that out?
Well, Erewhon was not a grocery store, but thank you for bringing it out. What happened was that I had asthma from 6 months old, and the earliest reported case of asthma in San Mateo County, and I was rushed to the hospital for the first year of my life when I turned blue, and they put me in an oxygen tent. Finally, they strapped me down for 6 weeks in an oxygen tent, and forbid my parents to visit because I got too, so excited about that in the oxygen tent. And so I had asthma all my life, and the only palliative that was offered was aminophylline ephedrine, which is a drug, ephedra, which was banned in diet supplements in 2004, but that was my drug of choice by prescription, and it allowed me to breathe. And when I was 18, 19, I read a book, and it said, if you're sick, it's your fault. And it really pissed me off. I said, I had it for 6 months, wasn't my fault. But what the book was trying to say is it's your responsibility. In other words, don't play victim. And that made sense to me. And so I went on a food fast that the book prescribed, which is just eating brown rice, chewing it till it was drool in your mouth, and drinking tea. And I did that for 10 days. But on the 8th day, I could breathe. I could feel the air at the bottom of my lungs, and I stopped taking my medicine, and it was revelatory. And in a way, I was just over the top delighted. At the same time, I was a little pissed off because I've been involved with the medical establishment and, for all those years. And this was so simple. And I was incredulous in a way. And so what happened is I was eating by then rice and vegetables. And I kept adding one thing, a hamburger, a milkshake, a Coca-Cola, a beer, apple juice, whatever. And I could actually feel then the change in my physiology from that one food, which you can't detect that when you're eating the common American diet. You're eating French fries and ketchup and this and that and all those things. And you can't distinguish which food is having which impact on you. And after I did that for almost a year, I didn't go to the supermarket again. I went to farmers markets, and I went to ethnic stores, and the Quaker Mill, in Chinatown, Japantown, and Lebanese Town, and to do my shopping on Saturday. And I thought, since I grew up on a farm and we used to have a farm stand and we bought from them, that there should be a farm stand in the city. There should be a place in the city where you can go get real food that was organically grown, that was fresh. Didn't have an ingredient list that you had to translate, if ingredient list at all. And that's how Erewhon started. And it grew into, we had a rail car, we had a warehouse, a 5-story warehouse in South Boston. We had a store in LA, we had a store in Boston. We had farms, we had 35,000 acres contracted to us from farmers all over the country. We had 3,000 wholesale accounts. So it was the beginning of the organic food movement in the United States. Not to say that there were other companies too, Matt. Of course there were, but for us, that's what I did. And it eventually was sold and sold again, and to people who but created the Erewhon stores in LA, and now I think they have one in New York.
Well, it's an amazing story, and I think it all relates to your personal journey, but it also relates to kind of where we're at as a planet. And one of the things that you talk about in a number of your books that I've read is the problems of the agro business and and all this fake food, this processed food that we get is a big part of our ecological problem. And as you describe it, it's also part of our health problem. So maybe you could talk about some of those things and how do we stop this process of those agro businesses feeding our fellow citizens all this junk, which is just terrible for their health and it's terrible for the planet.
The food system, which is the makers, the farmers, the producers, is the single greatest cause of global warming, and it's the single greatest cause of human disease. That is the story. And you parse it and get down into the details, which I would love to do. And to me, food companies, and I'll say this brazenly, like Pepsi and other ultra-processed food companies are committing a crime against humanity by spending $5 billion a year convincing our children to eat sugar, soft drinks, and junk food.
Well, I'll get an amen on that one. I mean, I believe that the food companies are just poisoning us in so many different ways. They've created this torrent of diabetes and diabetics in the United States. The cost alone, I read a few years ago, was $330 billion and climbing. And we're going to have, I can't remember, tens of millions of new diabetics because of the terrible diet that gets fed to Americans.
Yeah, 73% of our food is ultra-processed food, 73%. And human beings weren't designed for ultra-processed food. And the numbers are worse. We have a $4 trillion so-called healthcare industry. It's not. It's a sick care industry. And it feeds itself, and you'll have diseases, and you'll go to a doctor, and he will prescribe something. It's just medicine. But it doesn't go back upstream to cause. And 150,000 Americans every year have part of their leg or ankle cut off because of diabetes, sawed off. And that's downstream. Upstream are these huge companies, with advertising budgets and, featuring Beyonce and whatever, convincing very impressionable young children that if they eat or drink, Mountain Dew, somehow they're going to have a better life. And it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's really unconscionable. It's, the type, as a lawyer, we would look at a conscious disregard of the rights and safety of others is a basis for punitive damages. It's punishment. And that is what these companies are doing. They are consciously disregarding the rights and safety of the consumers and feeding them things that are essentially like poison.
Gosh, I'd never heard that legal term before. I love it. Let's do a lawsuit.
Okay, let's do it. You can be the plaintiff. I'll be the attorney. Okay.
I'll get 1,000 children to be the plaintiffs. That should be the plaintiffs,
Okay, let's do it. Yeah, I mean, clearly our food problems are the source of so many problems in our society. Obviously, as you just said, the health problems are just gargantuan. And if we were really serious about having a healthy society, we would go at food first and say, hey, we want to clean up our food source and make everything that we're eating organic, period.
We have to go backwards to the farm. And actually, agriculture is industrialized. It's chemical-based. If people had any idea what actually happens on commodity farms, they would be repulsed. They basically do not feed the soil. They feed the plant chemicals, and the plants don't need to really go down very deep into the soil because the macronutrients are right there. And they grow, but they grow in a very unhealthy way. They grow too quickly. They look very green from the nitrogen, of course, but they're subject then to infestation. It looks like a big free buffet to all the insects for tens of thousands of acres, and So we use pesticides. We use neonicotinoids that last 5 years that kill insects, but also are systemic. They go into the plant. The insects eat them on the plant, die. Birds eat the insects. They have mortality events as well. So that's just the beginning. And what we do know is that soil health relates to plant health, and plant health relates to human and animal health. And unless we are aware of that connection, we just are subject to basically going up and down the aisles of our supermarkets and buying what's available. But the health of the nation, the health of our children starts with the soil.
Well, you're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, and I've got Paul Hawken on the program. We'll be right back in just 1 minute. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, and I've got Paul Hawken, noted author, environmentalist, on the program today. And we were just talking about nutrition as it relates to the agribusiness. And Paul just kind of want to pick it up back there in terms of what are your thoughts on how do we make changes to really make a 180 on agriculture and food in the United States and across the world?
Well, there are actually very big companies that some of the biggest food companies in the world are actually aware of the problem and are changing over to regenerative agriculture in a very quiet way. They're not bragging. They're not using it as a way to make themselves look good. They're actually doing it to create resilience in the food system. The thing about regenerative agriculture as compared to industrial agriculture is that it can withstand greater vagaries of the weather, that is to say heat, cold, too little water, too much water, floods, than conventional agriculture. So when you move to systems of farming that actually feed the life of the soil, and you have cover crops and you don't let the sun see the top of the soil, and you have the beneficial pollinators, insects and so forth, when you have those kind of systems where the cover crops are actually also fertilizing the soil in a much better way, you're getting a food system that actually can be, as I say, more resilient, can withstand the vagaries and the ups and downs and disruption of weather, which is here and going to increase as time goes on within the next decades. This year is a tryout for the future. It's just a hint of what's going to happen. It's not like an anomaly. And I think that's difficult for people to incorporate and integrate and to take in. It's like, you got to be kidding. No, I'm not kidding. That was predicted 50 years ago by scientists, and the only difference is that they thought it would happen later than sooner. Otherwise, it's exactly what was predicted by climatologists. So agriculture, in terms of being organic and regenerative, is actually a way for us to ensure that we have a sustainable food supply, as opposed to say, well, it's a nice thing to do, it's the best thing to do, it's very, idealistic. No, it's the most pragmatic thing that we can do right now in terms of our food system, and it produces healthier food for everybody who eats it, and whether it's in animals or whether it's people around the world. And as I said, we have a $4 trillion sick care industry, and it is as if food didn't exist, and doctors aren't trained in nutrition. When I was dealing with my asthma, you had 0 hours to become an MD about nutrition, 0. And now I think it's an hour. You have an hour to become a physician studying nutrition, and even that nutrition doesn't really take into consideration the whole of the food supply, the whole of the cycle from whence food arises and exists, So it's a very exciting time. I'm not trying to be a doomsayer here. I'm just trying to say that the amount of change that's occurring in agriculture is extraordinary. I hope the food business at some point wakes up and realizes that it should also change too.
What about the policies of the Biden administration regarding agriculture? Have they been effective? Have they moved the needle at all towards uh, getting more farmers to go to regenerative agriculture?
They're doing something here. Bill Sick is the head of the Department of Agriculture, and he's, with all due respect, I think he's a nice guy, but he's in the throes of the chemical industrial agricultural industry, Syngenta, Corteva, Bayer, Monsanto, Cargill. I mean, they control USDA policy. There is a program in the Farm Bill now called Climate Smart Agriculture. They didn't dare call it organic or regenerative, and they call it Climate Smart, whatever that means. And there are things in there that encourage cover crops for sure, and there, I think there's subsidies, or I forget where the funding is going towards that. So there is movement, but there's not movement to move away from industrial agriculture. It's industrial agriculture is seeing that there is some benefit from these things, but it doesn't threaten their core business, which is synthetic fertilizers, glyphosate, dicamba, paraquat, pesticides, neonics, all the hundreds of different pesticides and herbicides that go onto the farm, onto the land, into our food, are actually completely protected under the new Farm Bill.
So is it going to be up to consumers to just from the demand side say enough is enough, we don't want to eat that garbage anymore?
Well, yes, it is. And that requires what we call food justice, which is the availability of fresh, good, healthy food in our communities everywhere. That's not true. Many, many people in urban environments live in what's called food deserts. You'd have to go 2 or 3 miles to a store that had healthy food, and you couldn't afford it. And so there are many organizations now within these food deserts, they're bringing in smaller fresh food, farmers markets, and trying to reconnect these urban islands to growers, that are within reasonable distance and so forth, to try to reconnect the agricultural system, healthy agricultural system, to people's well-being in the cities. And I find that it's a fun movement, it's a great movement, it's a necessary movement, and it's what's going to have to happen if we're going to recover both systems, our social systems and our agricultural systems.
I'm just wondering what percentage of our $4 trillion spend on healthcare would it take to get people healthy food? Because it seems like it would be just a small percentage of that $4 trillion to get people healthy food, which would solve a lot of the problems with people's from a health standpoint.
Yeah, and who's getting that food? Who's getting that money? Pharmaceuticals. Right. Yeah, I mean, they don't make money from health. They make money from sickness.
They certainly do, and of course there are very few studies on the benefits of eating healthy food. There's lots of studies on how to, the value of their drugs, but not very many studies on what would the positive effects be of eating a healthy diet, just like you did in your personal situation to get healthy from asthma.
Exactly. And the thing is, the ideal pharmaceutical drug is something you have to take every day for the rest of your life, right? That's ideal. Statins, great idea. Okay, let's take it every day, right? Instead of going back, upstream and saying, well, what's causing those heart problems? Look at what are you eating, and what's your genetics for sure? What's your predilections, for genetically, but actually it's downstream, which is, basically palliative, not curative, and that's our industry, and it controls, just like Big Ag controls the USDA, the CDC, and the FDA is controlled by Big Pharma.
Well, I certainly had a situation myself where my cholesterol had gone up a bit, and the doctor wanted to put me on statins. And I said, well, let me just try changing my diet and cut cut down on the red meat dramatically and cut down on eggs and things like this. And lo and behold, he said, "Oh wow, it's your cholesterol went down." So it is within our power to do these things if we change our diet.
Absolutely. I mean, look at eating rice and drinking tea did not cure my asthma. It created the conditions whereby the asthma was not occurring. Okay. I mean, what healed me was a wide variety of healthy foods over time. But it's interesting when I went back to my doctors and said, wow, I don't have symptoms anymore. I'm not taking the drugs. I'm eating this healthy diet, they said, well, that was probably a placebo effect. They didn't take it seriously at all.
Yeah, unfortunately, as you said, most doctors are not trained in nutrition. They don't really understand it as well as they should. I always say that our human bodies are the most sophisticated pharmacological device out there and are far more sophisticated than what the big pharma can create and far more effective.
Oh, here's a quick factoid. There's 10,000 ingredients in a head of broccoli. There's 10,000 ingredients in a head of kale, in a bunch of kale. Okay. There's only a 10% overlap. We're just discovering we have no idea what's in our food.
Well, everybody stay tuned. You're listening to A Climate Change. I've got Paul Hawken, noted environmentalist, entrepreneur, economist, author, activist, and we'll be right back in just 1 minute. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matern, and I've got Paul Hawken on the program. Paul, we were talking about the food chain. I'm going to pivot a little bit with you, and we'll talk about some other issues. I mean, you've got so much stuff that you've written about in your most recent book, Regeneration-Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. It sounds like a very, a hopeful, title certainly there. Tell us a little bit about the trajectory of the book and why you wrote it.
I wrote it because I feel like the conversation about climate has focused almost entirely on carbon. And I believe there's what I would call the carbon tunnel syndrome, which is looking at carbon as this inert substance, that is problematic. There's too much of it up there because of the combustion of fossil fuels and the way we've treated the environment. And somehow we've got to stop doing that and bring it back home. And if we do that, we get a hall pass to the next century, which is nonsense. We have to do that. There's no question about that, by the way. I mean, it's imperative that we do that. But it basically presumes that the rest of the world will be there for us when we get there. And we have lost half of all biomass and life on the planet in the last 200 years, and the rate of loss is increasing right now at the highest level. And so it's almost as if we have a climate movement that sort of assumes the planet will be there, in fact is destroying the planet. And even some of the climate solutions are destroying the planet. And destroying the planet by extracting. I mean, the first principle of really reversing climate, and it's not really reversing climate change because climate is always going to change. What we want to reverse is global warming, global heating. We want to reverse the impact climate is having upon society. Climates are, like I say, always going to be changing. They're supposed to. That's what climate does. And so we don't want to fight that. What we want to do is understand how we've changed it, because the climate or the atmosphere is simply responding to what we do here on Earth. No other reason. And so how do we change what we're doing here? And one of the principles of what we do has to be reciprocity, which is after hundreds and centuries of time where we've just been taking, from the forest, from people, from cultures, from oceans, from the land, from soil, from water. We have to actually have reciprocity, which is you have to give more than we take. So regeneration is about how can we supply and human needs, and all human needs in a way that creates more life instead of taking life. And that we have an economic system that takes life in order to provide with human needs. Well, we don't argue about providing humans with their needs. That's not the question. The question is, how are we doing that? And that's why, again, regenerative agriculture, not to just focus on that entirely, is an example where you restore the soil, you restore the health of the soil, pollinators, bird life, nutrition that comes out of the soil in terms of plants, and everybody's a winner. There's a winner all the way across. And so the question, and it's my question too, but for all of us, is how can we build our homes? How can we operate our cities? How can we, our schools? How can we live here together as a civilization in such a way that on a step-by-step basis, we are creating more life instead of less? And that's really what regeneration is about.
Let me ask you about, you mentioned that some of the climate solutions are destroying the planet. One of the things that is talked about a lot is the amount of mining that has to be done for, say, electric car batteries. Do you think it's still a net benefit to our society, to the planet, to create millions, if not billions, of electric cars with that mining?
You've raised a really important point, a really important question. And there's an underlying assumption that if we swap out our technology and how we build our buildings and how we drive, how our mobility, how we make our cars, with systems that are arguably more renewable and less impactful, that we're good to go. And actually, the underlying assumption there is that capitalism can cure consumption. In other words, that we can consume just as much as we are right now, and even more so as we move on, and that's going to work, and it's not. And so, going back to mining specifically, we can't do what you spoke to. No, we cannot continue to mine and to build out a so-called, sustainable society. And we certainly don't want to mine the oceans, which is now what they're talking about in order to gather those important minerals that are needed for a renewable society. And I think that at the other hand, I mean, not to just be, a complainer, sound like I'm complaining, there is some extraordinary stuff going on in terms of batteries and reimagining what a battery is, how it works, what it's made of, that don't require these minerals, whether they be trace minerals or rare minerals or just plain minerals like, that are being mined from Chile, the lithium in Chile and others in the Congo. And so my hope is that these breakthroughs will happen sooner instead of later. There's even a very famed scientist in the University of Maryland, Ling Bing Hu, who is inventing a wooden battery that works, and he has the chops to do it and has invented things that really do work in other areas, and that's being funded by the Department of Energy. So your question is really well placed, actually, which is no, we cannot just assume that we can continue to extract and harm the world for a sustainable society.
Well, it seems as though, given the amount of build out of technology and infrastructure to whether we go a more sustainable battery or whatever the route may be, is going to take a tremendous amount of shifting of our industrial base. And it wouldn't just consuming less be a far more elegant solution to this problem than just, trying to live at the same or greater rate of consumption than we've lived heretofore?
Absolutely. And I think it's not, it's like the, oh gosh, it's like the subject that nobody wants to attend to. Business doesn't want to talk about it, and politicians don't want to talk about it. And people actually don't want to even think about it because most people don't have enough, or at least they think they don't have enough. And in many cases, they do not. And so we actually have to think about this in a way that how do we really support those people who wake up every morning with the current existential threat. They're worried about food, they're worried about food security, they're worried about security for their children, about education, about clothing, about warmth, about housing, about jobs that give them dignity and a living wage. That's most of the people on Earth right now. And what's so interesting about the climate solutions that are in drawdown and regeneration is you look at them from a different point of view. What you find, in fact, is that they create a better life for virtually everybody on the planet, but they don't, not based on extraction and consumption and a way of living here that actually is destroying our host. We're the only species. There's 8.7 billion species on Earth, and we're the only one that eats its host and destroys its habitat. so, there's room to maneuver here, to think about living here in such a way that doesn't do that.
Well, I love, there's an Eisenhower quote in your book. Back in 1953, Eisenhower was talking about the cost of a bomber to society, and how many hospitals and roads and homes could be created for the price of that bomber, and now that has increased, like 10 or 50 fold with the bombers that we currently have. And so maybe just a different way to look at that we have the economic means to solve many of our problems if we reallocated some of our resources for problems that are not military ones.
Absolutely. And one of the ways we could do that is, and work with every other country in the world, why can't we have a cabinet post that's called the Department of Peace? In other words, why not? I mean, okay, we'll have a Department of War too in case, but can we actually look at the real cure? War is not a cure.
It seems like a great idea to me. You're listening to A Climate Change. I've got Paul Hawken on the program, and we'll be back in just 1 minute to talk to Paul about a host of issues. You're listening to A Climate Change. I've got Paul Hawken, author of Regeneration-Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. And I just read recently that Bill Gates was essentially saying that the trillion trees idea is more or less silly and not particularly helpful. What's your take on that one?
I have mixed feelings about it. I agree with him, by the way, on the trillion trees. So not about that. His idea, his point is well taken. Trillion trees where and which trees? What the world needs is forests, not more, more forests for sure, but on whose land, where will they be placed, and how will they be planted, and to who benefits from this, and so forth. What we overlook is that there's 5 megaforests, Matt, in the world: the Amazon, the Congo, the Boreal, both the taiga on the Russian side and the boreal on our side, and then there's Indonesia, and there's Borneo. And if we protect those forests the way they are right now, it's 40 times more effective than the trillion tree movement and 7 times less costly. And so there is this sort of very male-oriented thing of like, we're over the top, we're going to save the earth, okay. Well, let's do it, but let's use our brains. Let's do the math, instead of just being sort of, a sort of colonial hero, And the people in the South, the global South, are appalled by that idea because they're saying, you're talking about our land for your trees to save your ass up in the north when you're the one who is emitting most of the carbon, So there's a real thing, dissonance there. Now, on the other hand, what Bill Gates says, he thinks that direct air capture is a solution. Well, direct air capture is basically these giant plants that literally suck in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, liquefy it, and then pump it into geological formations or in depleted oil formations. And there is one being built right now by Occidental Petroleum in Ector County, Texas, and it'll cost $1 billion. It'll cost $300 million a year to operate, right? It will capture 500,000 tons of CO2, okay? And if you do the math, that means that it will sequester or capture 360 seconds of global emissions. And that's for $300 million a year and $1 billion. And gosh, if there are so much better ways to spend that money. And so Bill Gates, being a techno-optimist, is into that, when in fact there are, in the megaforest, it's just one example, I can give others and so forth, where human beings can be so much more effective in addressing the issues and the climate crisis that's at hand.
Well, one of the things that you said was kind of the male-oriented approach to solving problems, and I noticed that in your book you had referenced that Stephen Mitchell, and I believe it's this Stephen Mitchell who is a translator of the Tao Te Ching that I really like, which is the Tao is not about forcing and more about allowing, and we'd be far better served by a less man, changing nature philosophy, and curious as to Stephen Mitchell's input into this process or your connection to him.
Yeah, he's a very good friend. I respect him very, very much. He actually wrote one of his books in a cottage on my property. But it's not just man, it's male. Let's be clear about this. It's a gender thing. And men like to fix things and make it better, and that's all cool, and it's a great quality. But when it comes to the planet, the verb is wrong, fix. You can't fix it, it's fixed. What we're doing is harming, and we have to stop the harm. As opposed to that. The Earth creates the conditions for more life automatically. And we don't. We do the opposite. We create the conditions for less life. And so what we're talking about is like, well, what does that mean? And I have the same questions as others, which is, okay, what does that mean for this and that service and that, for housing and for cities and for transport, et cetera, the things that we rely upon. And I think those answers are forthcoming and extant, and we need more of them. But I think we have to, our frame of mind has to, and I'll be gender specific, has to be much more like a woman's frame of mind, looking at connection, and than the male one, which is a little bit over the top.
Well, now that you're talking about female connection or more creative energy, I noticed that Giselle Bundchen was listed in your book as a contributor or a supporter. How is she connected to the movement?
Well, Giselle is a friend, and she's an extraordinary intelligent woman. People probably don't know that because she's so beautiful. They think, well, that's Giselle, but actually her beauty, her deeper beauty is inside. And she grew up in a very wonderful place in Brazil, very she was, nature girl. She spent her time outside, with creatures and plants and so forth. And that has never left her, that's been a part of her. So she was very, very helpful in promoting drawdown, and also drawdown in Brazil. And she remains a friend. And but I mean, I just think that part of Giselle is in a lot of people, who find themselves as professionals doing this and that, and working in office towers or whatever, being photographed. And we really got to get back in touch with that part of us. And for those in the city who've never been able to be in nature and to experience it. I think one of the most important solutions in terms of reversing global warming is to get people away from their screens, away from digital information and awareness, and have a direct awareness of where we live and how it works. And it's fascinating and magical and infinitely varied. And so I don't think watching whatever you watch or whatever you read is sufficient unto the task at hand to actually develop that sense of wonder and awe and mystery. My next book is called Carbon, the Book of Life. I just finished it. And it is exactly about that, which is, oh my gosh, look where we live. It's so amazing and so fantastic, you know. And I think we're cut off from that sense of wonder. And, you know, you're going to protect what you love. And we have to create those conditions where we can fall in love with where we live, with this beautiful, exquisite planet. It's a Goldilocks planet. There's only one we got. But when you get into it, as opposed to saying nature-based or, you know, all those kind of terms, forget all that. And you get into that, whether it's the soil, whether it's plants, gardens, pollinators, you know, I mean, insects, you know, butterflies, you know, the ocean. So when you take any part of that and start to really understand what's going on there, it's gobsmacking. It is extraordinary. And we all need an injection of that.
Well, I amen to that one too. I do a gratitude exercise every day, and it just kind of has me open my eyes to the beauty of the world around me, and just the flowers, the trees, the whole thing is just amazing. Yeah, it's unfortunate we don't have more time with you, but it's been great having you on the program. Thanks, Paul Hawken. Go out and get a copy of Paul's book, Regeneration-Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. Also, take a look for his new book, Carbon, the Book of Life. Follow him on social media. And be the change we want to see in the world. Be kind, and if everybody'd be so kind as to follow us on A Climate Change with Matt Matern, go to aclimatechange.com. We've got about 125 episodes. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, or iHeart, and pass these links along to friends, family, business associates, and let's work together as a community to solve these problems. So, Paul, again, thanks for all the work you've been doing over the last 60 years, and would love to collaborate with you going forward.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for what you're doing. Let me have one last quote from Jill Clapperton. It says, when you're standing on the ground, you're standing on the roof of another world. That's how beautiful this earth is.
Well, I love that. So what a way to close. Thank you again, Paul.